James Anderson, a cold businessman, was facing the immense pressure of important decisions that affected the entire company. His office was like a picture of tension. The air was stuffy. The cold fluorescent lights on the ceiling shone directly on the pile of papers in the computer screen. The whirring of the air conditioner, mixed with the clicking of keys, made the space even darker. James sat there, his eyes sharp but full of anxiety, moving through each number, each chart on the screen. Those numbers represented the future of the company, and his future. In recent days, everything seemed to be nothing but failure and crisis. The latest financial reports all pointed to a severe decline in profits. James didn't allow himself to fail, but he was also tired. The stress made it impossible for him to concentrate as before. Suddenly, he looked up. His eyes lit up as if he had suddenly thought of something. He looked over at Linda, the faithful maid who had worked for him for over 3 years. Linda was always there, quiet and dedicated, never questioning any of his orders. James stood up and walked over to Linda's desk, his eyes full of power and without a moment's hesitation. "Linda," he said, his voice deep and commanding, "I need you to come with me to an important dinner tonight. This is not an invitation but an order. Get ready, and remember that no comments are allowed." Linda paused, her eyes widening at James. This was the first time he had asked her to accompany him to such an important event. She herself understood her place in James's life, just a maid, nothing more, nothing less. But she also understood that this could be a rare opportunity for her to escape the guise of a maid, to assert herself in front of the powerful people she had only heard of through stories. Linda chose not to object. After a moment's thought, she nodded and replied softly, "Yes, I'll get ready right away." James didn't say another word. He just nodded slightly and went back to his desk. Linda looked at him for a moment, then went back to her work. Inside her was a jumble of emotions. She knew that James was ambitious, selfish, and sometimes cruel, but there were times when she saw loneliness and pressure in his eyes. At times like these, she couldn't help but feel a little sorry for him. The once successful and strong man, now having to contend with the harsh challenges of business life. Linda returned to her private room to prepare for the evening. She opened the wardrobe, her hands shaking as she ran through the simple clothes. She didn't have any outfits suitable for such a luxurious party. After thinking for a while, she decided to choose the simplest, but also the most beautiful dress she had. She knew she wouldn't be able to shine like the other women at dinner, but she decided to face this challenge with confidence. When Linda appeared at the door of James's office, he looked at her with an impassive expression. "Good, let's go," he said, then walked out without looking back. Linda followed him, her mind full of thoughts, but she still kept a calm face. She understood that tonight would be a big turning point in her life. It could be an opportunity, but it could also be a risk. But anyway, she had made up her mind. She will not back down. Linda and James stepped into the luxury car parked outside. On the way to the restaurant, no one said a word to anyone. James just looked out the window, while Linda sat next to him, trying to keep herself calm. She knew that this dinner was not just an ordinary meeting. James never did anything without a purpose, and her participation tonight certainly carried some meaning that she couldn't understand. The car sped through the night. The car parted like an entire city pouring through a gateway. Linda clearly felt her tonight would be an unforgettable night. Linda clearly felt her heart beat faster, and she reminded herself that no matter what happened, she would have to do her best. This was not just a dinner. This was her chance to change her life. The luxurious restaurant shimmered with yellow lights. The brilliant crystal chandeliers reflected light throughout the space, creating an atmosphere that was both solemn and dreamy. The space is particularly sophisticatedly decorated, with meticulously arranged bouquets of fresh flowers at each corner of the table, sparkling glasses, and pristine white tablecloths. The clinking of glasses, mixed with the laughter of powerful people in the business world, all blended together to create a luxurious but tense scene. James entered with a confident and cold demeanor, while introducing Linda casually, as if she were just a topping, something not worth explaining further. This is Linda. She will be with me tonight, he said, not bothering to explain further. Linda clearly felt the curious eyes from the investors, the sharp, calculating eyes of the rich and powerful. She felt like she was being scrutinized, as if she were a blank sheet of paper placed under a projector. They didn't know who she was, and no one seemed to care. Linda felt completely lost in this splendid space, where everyone was wearing expensive clothes and saying things she didn't understand. She felt like an outsider, lost among the elite she didn't belong to. However, Linda decided to remain calm. She had learned to control her emotions during her years working with James. Despite the sharp eyes and judgment from strangers, she remained silent and listened to the conversations around the table, focusing on trying to understand what was going on. She knew she couldn't show weakness or embarrassment at this point. The only thing Linda could do was keep quiet, listen, and observe. As the minutes passed, Linda began to feel more clearly the tension and power hidden in the conversations. Investors exchanged about profits, projects, and financial plans. James joined the conversation with a cold, precise air and left no loopholes. He exuded confidence and was clearly a seasoned executive, but Linda also realized that behind that confidence was a hard-to-hide anxiety, an insecurity that he never let out. While James and the investors were preoccupied with numbers and profits, Linda suddenly felt a man's eyes staring at her. Lewis, a high-ranking investor with sharp eyes, abruptly stopped the conversation and asked in a challenging tone, "Who are you? Why are you here?" Linda raised her head, trying to stay calm. Her heart was pounding, but she knew this was the moment she needed to prove herself. Lewis's eyes seemed to challenge her, as if trying to check if she was worthy of appearing in a place like this. Linda didn't let herself be intimidated by that look. She smiled slightly, then replied in a calm but confident tone, "I came here to understand that a company's not only judged by numbers, but also by understanding the people behind it." For a moment, the room suddenly fell silent. Curious and distrustful eyes were now all directed towards Linda. Her words, simple but meaningful, surprised everyone. Linda could feel the change in the atmosphere. Some investors looked at each other in surprise, as if they didn't expect an ordinary woman like her to be able to utter such words. Lewis also paused, his eyes gradually shifting from curiosity to unexpected respect. James turned to look at Linda, his eyes showing surprise. He didn't think Linda would speak up, let alone that she could speak so confidently and intelligently. However, deep down, James felt uncomfortable. He had asked Linda to remain silent, but she dared to break that request. He didn't like being out of control in front of investors. Linda, after finishing speaking, returned to her usual calm, but inside, she could clearly feel her own excitement. She knew what she had just done was very risky, but it was also her chance to prove herself. Sometimes, the boldest steps are the only opportunities to escape one's own limitations. The conversation continued, but Linda could feel the change in the way people looked at her. No longer were they probing eyes, but now interest and even respect. Linda did something no one in the room expected. She stood up and expressed her voice, even though she didn't belong in this world. Dinner continued to drag on. The conversation still revolved around business topics, but the atmosphere changed a bit. Lewis didn't ask Linda any more questions, but he continued to look at her with a thoughtful expression. As for James, although he still participated in the conversation, it seemed that at times his eyes glanced towards Linda, as if to reevaluate the woman standing beside him. Linda understood that the road ahead was still very long, but she felt proud of herself. Tonight was an unforgettable night, not only because of the luxury and tension of the dinner, but also because it was the night she began to dare to step out of her comfort zone and prove that she could do more than what people expected. She was no longer just a maid, but had become a real part of the big picture of James Anderson's life and his company. The conversation at the party continued when a tall investor named Richard suddenly raised the issue of corporate social responsibility. His eyes were deep and suspicious, as if he meant something strange when he looked at James, then turned to Linda. Richard asked in a calm voice, as if posing a common question that everyone was interested in. What have companies like James's sincerely done for the community? Linda, although knowing this could be detrimental to James, still did not hesitate to speak up. Companies must be responsible to the community. That is the only way to develop sustainably. Linda's voice was still calm, but it contained a passionate soul. Our main goal is, of course, profit, James said, his voice higher, carrying a coldness as if to emphasize. Without profit, we would not be able to exist, to be able to contribute to the community. He looked at Linda, intending to restrain her speech. Linda kept her eyes fixed on him, her voice unwavering, still full of confidence. I understand that, James. But if we only look at the short-term goal of profit, the long-term vision for sustainable development will be blurred. Profit and social responsibility are not two separate things. We have to learn to balance both. The atmosphere in the room became heavy. Everyone around had stopped to watch the confrontation between James and Linda. Richard's eyes seemed amused, as if he was waiting to see who would win this power struggle. James grimaced, his tired eyes seemingly restraining his emotions. He let out a sigh before saying, Linda, you have to understand. In this world, leaders have to face difficult decisions. I appreciate your honesty and enthusiasm, but sometimes we need to set limits. Linda responded in a measured but confident voice. I understand the limits you speak of, James. However, for me, that limit must be the difference that our business upholds, not what is only sought in the short term. She looked straight into his eyes, as if challenging his leadership. James felt anger rising, but also had to admit Linda's brutal honesty made him confused. Meanwhile, Richard began to nod, as if watching a fascinating play. The atmosphere in the room became heavier and heavier, and the eyes from the investors were filled with the discord between James and Linda. The investors began to exchange glances, and no one dared to speak. Finally, James cut off the conversation, his voice softer. We'll continue discussing this later. He turned to the investors with a wry smile. Enjoy your dinner. Linda watched, her heart churning. She knew she had touched a sensitive vein, but what she said was also an undeniable truth. James was still a talented person, but she understood that sustainable development was the key factor he lacked. And whatever happens next, she will not hesitate to speak up, to fight for what she believes in. James knew Linda was informing him of a broader vision, which made him feel both uncomfortable and attracted. Part of James knew that Linda was the only one who dared to be honest with him, and to say things that no one else dared to say. When he returned to his office, James called Linda in and shouted mercilessly. His voice echoed throughout the room, the words sharp as knives cutting through the spine. I told you to be quiet. Do you understand what that means? You made me lose face in front of the investors. James put both hands on the table, his eyes ready to explode at Linda. Anger sometimes reached the realm of uncontrollability, his face sometimes changing color. Linda stood calmly in front of James. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment, as if to absorb his words. Her heart was beating fast, but her face remained calm. I don't regret what I said, Linda replied calmly, her eyes still fixed on James. I just do what I believe is right. I believe investors need to understand how we create value, not just from profit. James looked at Linda, his face turning from surprise to indignation. He suddenly slammed his hand on the table. The glasses on the table rattled, a loud sound echoing, making the atmosphere in the room even more suffocating. I don't need you to lecture me, Linda. You don't know how much I had to struggle to achieve everything today. You ruined everything I tried. Linda didn't back down. She looked straight into James's burning eyes, her face still calm, though in her mind, she knew she could face serious consequences. James, I respect what you did to get where you are today, but for me, success is not just about calculating profit. It's about contriving real value to society and to the employees who always stand behind you. James clearly felt the strength in Linda's voice. In a few seconds of probing, he began to understand that Linda would no longer endure behind him as a tool. It made him feel something stir in his chest, a trait he had never felt before. James gritted his teeth, a futile attempt to help him control his anger. "Fine," he shouted. "You're done here. From now on, you're no longer my maid. You're fired." Linda nodded slightly. She didn't say another word, no begging, no resistance. She turned and walked away, her high heels echoing on the cold wooden floor, the echo like a farewell to the exploitation she had endured for so long. The door closed behind Linda, and James suddenly felt the silence left like a punch. In his mind, he still thought of Linda's calm eyes, with a strong look, like someone who knew the battle was over, and she was the winner. Linda walked out with dignity, her eyes strong despite the coldness left in James's room. In her heart, she realized that this was the moment of liberation. She was no longer bound by this dependence. It was time for her to start over, to express herself, and rebuild a new life, a life of independent and resilient value. Linda left the old apartment with mixed emotions. Although she had lost her old job at James's house, deep down, she felt she was entering a new chapter in her life. She started looking for opportunities, and after a few weeks of interviewing, Linda received an offer from a large community development company. It was an opportunity that not only brought financial independence, but also helped her develop leadership skills and contribute to a meaningful purpose. On her first day at the new company, Linda walked into the office with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. No longer a maid serving others, she was now part of the project development team, with the responsibility of creating real value for the community. She sat down at her desk, feeling the change in her surroundings. Her colleagues were all friendly and open, which helped Linda gradually integrate into the company culture. Linda put all her hard work and enthusiasm into her work. She was not afraid to learn from those around her, not afraid to stay up late, to prepare documents and complete work on time. She worked with a strong determination that she never thought she could have before. The projects, led by Linda, all achieved outstanding success, and this made her quickly recognized by her superiors. After only a few months, Linda was promoted to team leader in charge of the company's community development projects. One morning, Linda received an invitation from her superiors to attend an important company event. This event is not only a place to exchange ideas, but also an opportunity for leaders, partners, and employees to meet and share their vision. Linda prepared carefully for the event, wearing an elegant dark blue dress, her eyes shining with pride and determination. She stepped into the grand hall of the hotel where the event was taking place and immediately felt the solemn atmosphere pervading. She did not expect that in this event she would meet James again. James stood in the distance, among colleagues and business partners, still elegant in a black suit and usual coldness. When their eyes met, Linda felt a wave of emotion surge. James also recognized her immediately. His eyes were a little surprised and somewhat embarrassed. She was no longer the maid who used to silently stand behind his requests, but an influential leader. James walked towards Linda, trying to hide his embarrassment. "Linda," he began, his voice somewhat slow, "I really didn't expect to see you here." Linda smiled, but there was a coldness in her eyes. "James, long time no see. I didn't expect we'd meet again under these circumstances either." James looked at her, his eyes sparkling with something indescribable. "You have changed so much," he said, his voice a little hoarse, as if trying to control his emotion. Linda still kept her smile but did not hide the confidence emanating from her posture. "I've had the opportunity to grow and prove myself. Isn't that what we should all do?" James was silent for a moment, as if weighing each word. He could not deny the fact that Linda had become a completely different woman. She stood before him, confident and strong, with nothing left of the woman who had always been behind to take care of him. "I truly admire your determination, Linda," James said slowly. "You have proven that you can do more than what others think." Linda nodded, her eyes softening a bit. "Thank you, James. I think sometimes we need to lose something to find ourselves, and I have found a new path, a new meaning to my life." James looked at her, as if wanting to say something, but then he just nodded. "I hope you will succeed on your path, Linda." Linda smiled, this time a warm smile. "Thank you, James. I also hope you will find what you are looking for." The conversation ended, But mixed emotions still lingered in the hearts of both of them. Linda knew that she had entered a new phase, leaving the past behind and facing the future stronger than ever. James, watching her shadow disappear, suddenly realized that he had lost something very precious. But now, Linda was a strong leader, and he could only watch from afar, admiring her maturity and confidence. Linda continued to move through the crowd, joining in discussions about community development projects. She felt confidence in every step she took. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but with determination and enthusiasm, she would continue to overcome all challenges. Now, Linda was no longer a maid behind the shadows, but had become an influential leader, an independent and strong woman. James stood in front of the office window, looking out at the cityscape above. The neon lights were dancing, the streets were bustling, all as if leaving him behind. The feeling of emptiness in his soul grew wider and wider as he witnessed the collapse of his company. James remembered past decisions, things he thought would surely bring success. He chose the ruthless path, focused on profit, regardless of the impact on employees and partners. He witnessed the departure of partners who used to respect him. Valuable contracts that he thought were already in his hands were taken away. He began to feel the consequences of his coldness and selfishness. In the empty office, James sank into his chair, his head bowed like a man who had lost hope. He witnessed loyal employees gradually leaving, the eyes that had once admired him before, leaving no longer held admiration, replaced by reproach and disappointment. It made him feel even more remorseful, and at that moment, he knew he had to change. James remembered Linda, the woman who dared to say things no one else dared. Linda did not hesitate to express her challenge. She made him realize that for the company to develop, it needed not only numbers, but also hearts and connections with employees. On a rainy day, James decided he could no longer hold back. He sought out Linda, the one he knew was the key to the change he was making. The conversation between the two took place in a small cafe near Linda's new company. "Linda, I apologize for what I did," James said, his voice heavy on his lips. "I was wrong, and I need your help to change the situation." Linda looked at him, her eyes suspicious, but also with a bit of pity. "Do you really want to change, James?" she asked, her voice soft but wary. James nodded, his shoulders heavy with the responsibility he had to bear. "Yes, I want to change. I realized I was wrong, that I needed the employees and the community to really grow." He paused, then continued, "And you're the only one who ever dared to tell me the truth." Linda was silent for a moment. Then she felt something was going on in James. He was no longer cold and arrogant as before. He really wanted to change. "James, change is not easy. You will have to learn to listen and respect people. This is not something that can be done overnight," Linda said, her eyes deep. James nodded, his eyes filled with undeniable determination. "I know, and I will try. I will learn to listen." Linda took a long breath, and finally she smiled slightly. "Okay, James, I'll help you, but only if I'm sure you really want to change." James takes time, and will take it one step at a time. James felt like a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He knew it would be a long journey, but with Linda by his side, he believed he could do it. That was the beginning of real change, a journey to not only regain success for the company, but also to create a driving force for change in the way James viewed himself and the world around him. "Linda, I want you to come with me to the project in the suburbs this week," James said, his voice softer than before. His eyes were no longer cold, but replaced with sincerity. Linda looked at him, a little surprise in her eyes. "Are you sure? I thought you always liked to work alone." James sighed, shrugged, a smile crossing his face. "May have been true before, but now I realize I need someone with your vision. I don't want to just go there and give directions. I want to really understand them, and I know you'll help me do that." Linda looked at James for a long time, feeling the change in him. She smiled softly and nodded in agreement. "Okay, I'll go with you, but I want you to understand that to really change, we need more than promises. We need concrete action, and to listen to them." James nodded, his eyes lit up with determination. "I know, and that's why I need you by my side." You're always honest with me, and I appreciate that. The trip to the suburbs started early that morning. Their car drove through dusty little roads, past old houses and abandoned fields. James didn't say much. He looked intently out the window, as if wanting to engrave in his mind the image of the people he had ignored. Linda sat beside him, her eyes never leaving James. She noticed his pensive expression, his eyes filled with thought. She decided to break the silence. "What are you thinking, James?" Linda asked softly, her voice carrying genuine concern. "Dave, I just really wish we could be together over drinks somewhere." Heavily, "I need it, Corby." James turned to look at her, a fleeting embarrassment on his face. "I'm thinking about what we've missed all these years, Linda. Maybe we've been so focused on profit that we've forgotten that there are so many people out there who need us. I feel sorry for that." Linda was silent for a moment. Then she put her hand on James's shoulder, gently squeezing it. "Sometimes we have to go through mistakes to realize what really matters. The important thing is that you are now trying to change." James nodded, a slight smile on his lips. "Thank you, Linda. I don't know what I would do without you by my side." When they arrived, James and Linda were greeted by a group of locals. The elderly people in the village had been waiting for them since early morning, their eyes filled with hope and also a bit reserved. James got out of the car, smiled sincerely, and approached. "Hello, everyone. I'm James Anderson. I'm here to listen to you, and together we can find ways to improve our lives," James said, his voice ringing out but without fanfare, just sincerity. Linda stood beside him, watching James communicate. She could feel the change from him. He was no longer a cold person who only cared about profit. He has become a true leader, knowing how to listen and care. An elderly man stepped forward, his voice deep but full of confidence. "Mr. Anderson, we have heard many promises before, but have not seen results. How are you different from those before?" James didn't shy away. He looked straight at the man. "I understand your skepticism. I'm not here just to make promises. I'm here to work with everyone, and I know that words are not enough. So I want everyone to follow and evaluate us through actions." Linda looked at James, feeling proud of this change. After the meeting, they sat with the villagers, listening to their stories, from the lack of clean water to the difficulties in taking care of their health. James listened with an attentiveness that Linda had never seen in him. James smiled, his heart filled with hope. He knew that the journey ahead would be challenging, but he was no longer afraid. With Linda by his side, he felt he could face any difficulty. They had begun a new journey, a journey not only for the company, but also for the community. As time passed, as their working relationship grew closer, both James and Linda began to realize that their connection went beyond the boundaries of work. Late working sessions, brainstorming sessions, and even times of facing difficulties together made them gradually realize that they were not only colleagues, but had become an important part of each other's lives. James felt his admiration for Linda gradually turn into a different feeling. He was surprised by the combination of gentleness and strength in her. He liked the way she looked him straight in the eye when arguing, without fear, and the way she smiled at him every time they achieved something together. He began to see Linda not only as a capable person, but also as an attractive woman, someone he wanted to protect and care for. Sometimes, when Linda laughed and joked with other colleagues, James felt a twinge in his heart. It wasn't jealousy, but a feeling of wanting to keep her specialness to himself. One night, after a long meeting, both James and Linda stayed at the office, neither wanting to leave. Outside, the cold air was gradually covering the city. The lights in the office seemed to be the only place to keep warm. Both sat in silence, only the sound of even breathing faintly in the quiet space. Linda felt something stirring in James's heart, something unusual. James looked at Linda, his eyes full of softness, affection, and fear. For a long time, he had kept those feelings at the bottom of his heart, only because he was afraid that this confession would ruin everything. He was afraid that it would make Linda, determined to work hard, a friend he still considered, waver. But now, when they were the only two people left in the room, James could no longer hide the pain in his heart. "Linda, James's voice wavered, carrying the anxiety and longing he had been holding back. I love you. I can't hide this feeling anymore. You're the only one who makes me want to be a better person, someone worthy of you." Linda was surprised. Her heart suddenly beat faster. But the feeling for these words was not unexpected. From the most memorable moments, from the silent glances, to the times James accidentally looked at her with caring eyes, Linda had a feeling that their connection went beyond the boundaries of work, but she never dared to admit it. Linda looked at James, her eyes lit up with warmth. She put her hand on his, feeling the slight tremor in it. "James, I love you too," she said, her voice responding with softness and sincerity. "I've felt it for a long time, but I didn't dare admit it, just like you." James gently turned his hand, pressing it against Linda's. His eyes were filled with emotion, as if suddenly a huge burden had been lifted from his heart. "I dreamed of one day being able to confess to you, but I was also afraid of losing you. Linda, you are an indispensable part of my life, and anything that could make me lose you terrified me." Linda was silent, her eyes thoughtful. She knew James was always an ambitious man, and work was everything to him. But now, in front of these sincere eyes, she felt that James was no longer a cold businessman, but a simple, sensitive person, giving his heart to her. She smiled slightly, gently placing a hand on James's shoulder. "James, you are also the most important person to me. I used to be afraid that this love would make us lose each other, but now I know that this love has helped us understand each other better and will take both of us further." James bristled a bit at her words. James moved closer to her until his head touched the center of her chest, and her hand drew back, as if to affirm that the love was real, not a dream. James moved closer, their foreheads touching. "Linda, I've been hoping for a day to feel this closeness. Let me be by your side, not only at work, but also in this life. I will protect you. I will do everything so that you can be happy." And Linda looked into those sincere eyes, feeling the longing, the intense affection James had for her. Her eyes were filled with tears, but they were tears of happiness. She held his hand tightly and said sincerely, "James, we will go on a new journey together, face all the challenges ahead together." At that moment, the two shared a sweet and sincere kiss, marking a new beginning for their love. The space around them seemed to disappear, leaving only them in true love. That night was not just a night after a long meeting, but an unforgettable moment, marking the beginning of a new chapter of love in the lives of James and Linda. After confessing their feelings, James and Linda felt a profound change in their relationship. Now there's not only cooperation at work, but also love and sincere care from the heart. They decided not to let love affect their work. Both had serious discussions about balancing personal and professional lives, and decided that each would always respect the other's independence and personal space. One early morning, James sat in his office, his eyes thoughtfully gazing at the computer screen, but his mind was lost in thought about Linda. He couldn't help but remember the moment he said he loved her. It was a moment he never wanted to forget. Linda entered the room, carrying 2 cups of hot coffee. She saw James's dreamy eyes and smiled softly. "What are you thinking, James?" she asked, placing the coffee cup on the desk. Linda hesitated. She asked, not sure if she believed her eyes. James looked up, took her hand, and pulled her into the chair next to him. "I'm thinking about us, about the moment we confessed our feelings to each other. I still can't believe you agreed to love me." James laughed, his eyes full of love. Linda laughed back, her eyes lit up with happiness. "Me too. It was a decision I never regretted. We've been through so much, and I know we can get through it all together." James squeezed Linda's hand tighter, feeling the warmth from her palm. "I promise to always protect you and not let anything hurt us. I know work can be stressful at times, but I believe that as long as I have you by my side, I can overcome anything." Linda smiled, gently resting her head on his shoulder. "I will always be by your side, James. We will build a better future together, not only for us, but for everyone around us." The projects they were working on now were not just work, but also carried passion and love. Linda always pays attention to the details, trying her best to ensure that each of their decisions is not only economically beneficial, but also has a positive impact on the community. James watched her work with admiring eyes. He loved her dedication and determination, loved the way she faced challenges without flinching. "Linda, I want us to be like this forever, overcoming challenges together and sharing joys together," James said, his voice warm. Linda looked deep into his eyes, her heart pounding. "We will always be like this, James. I believe that as long as we have each other, nothing is impossible." James pulled Linda into his arms, hugging her tightly in the peace of the evening. They walked on together, believing that they could overcome anything. The relationship between James and Linda grew stronger. They had learned to work together without having to hold back their emotions or fear that it would affect their work. Both understood that supporting each other was their greatest strength. One morning, James held an important meeting with the company's board of directors. Linda was also present at the meeting as his special advisor. As James presented the new project, Linda listened and observed the expressions of the members in the room. She knew James well and knew that he always had a long-term vision for sustainable development. When a member of the group asked a challenging question, Linda immediately added, further explaining the social aspects of the project. James was talking about, "We're not just focused on profit, we also want to make sure that everyone benefits from this development," she said, Hazel's eyes confident and her voice firm. James looked at her, his heart beating faster. He knew he couldn't have achieved this success without Linda. After the meeting ended, James walked over to Linda, a proud smile on his face. "Thank you, Linda. I don't know what I would do without you here today." Linda smiled, gently touching his hand. We're a team, James. I know we can do anything if we stick together." That afternoon, back in the office, James couldn't contain himself. He walked over to Linda and pulled her into his arms. "I love you, Linda. You're not just my partner at work. You're the only one I want to share every moment of my life with." Linda looked into James's sincere eyes, smiled, and whispered, "I love you too, James. We will always be together through every challenge and every success." James and Linda decided to hold the wedding in a simple but meaningful way. The ceremony took place on an autumn afternoon in the small garden that both of them loved. The faint sunlight shone down, creating a warm and peaceful atmosphere. Linda wore a pure white wedding dress, simple but elegant. James waited for her at the end of the aisle in an elegant suit. When Linda walked in, James couldn't take his eyes off her. His eyes were filled with love and admiration. He knew that the woman in front of him was not only the one he loved, but also the one who had changed his life forever. When Linda came to James, they exchanged loving and appreciative glances. "James, I never thought that one day I would find someone who made me feel as happy and secure as this. You have always been the one I can rely on, and I want to spend my whole life with you," Linda said, her voice soft but full of emotion. James took Linda's hand, his eyes also becoming moist. "Linda, since the day you walked into my life, everything has changed. You taught me that success is not just about making a lot of money, but also about creating real meaning for the lives of those around you. I want to build a future with you where we are not only happy, but also do good things for everyone." Friends and colleagues stood around, witnessing the moment the two exchanged vows. The atmosphere was filled with love and joy, as everyone felt that these two were born for each other. After the ceremony, James and Linda stood still, looking at the loved ones around them. "We had a rough start, but you know, Linda," James said, his eyes radiant. "Each of those challenges made our love stronger. I can't wait to start a new life with you." Linda smiled, her eyes sparkling. "Me too, James. We've been through so much, and I believe we'll continue to create miracles." They embraced each other, with the promise of a future full of hope and love. They knew the road ahead would not be easy, but together, nothing was impossible. James and Linda entered married life together, with a commitment that love and dedication would always be the guiding principle for all their actions. They both pledged to not only build a happy life for themselves, but also to continue to contribute to the community, helping those in need. They knew that the true legacy they left behind was not money or power, but the love and good values they passed on to those around them. James and Linda had overcome all difficulties together, and now they were starting a new chapter where love and kindness blended into a beautiful story forever. And with hearts beating in unison, they created a legacy that nothing could replace.